Welcome to another teaching from perfectingtheworld.com.
Good evening. So good to see you. Hope your new week is off to a fantastic start. If I haven't seen you since last week, Shavua Tov. I hope that you had a great Shabbat. We are continuing in our learning about biblical food and identity boundaries. And as a bit of an important trajectory, this is fundamental to all of our discussions, is defining what nevela is. We've seen already that nevela can be used for the carcasses of non-permissible species. We're looking today at the use of nevela for the carcasses of permissible species. And the question that I want to provoke with is this question here. When is my beef unclean? This actually reaches back into the fundamental question about why the term clean and unclean is not adequate to describe or to circumscribe the biblical dietary boundaries and instructions. And why is that? Because there are foods that are clean and unclean, that are permissible and not permissible, based on no measure of cleanness. Chametz during Pesach, the dam, the blood, from whether it's a clean or an unclean carcass, the chelev, the forbidden fats, the tithes, the teruma, the bechor, the firstborn. Those are all foods that are forbidden for consumption. However, they're not intrinsically unclean. But the question we're looking at here is going to cross between two different registers. And you'll see what I'm talking about here shortly. We're going to look at when beef is unclean. Really, it applies also to sheep and to goats. And we'll begin here with our primary verse on nevela. This is Deuteronomy 14:21. Lo tochelu kol nevela. Do not eat any carcass. Lager asher b'shareka tetana. You may give it to the sojourner at your gates. Wa'akala o machor, to eat, or sell it to the nachri, The logic, as we've pointed out, is given as ki am kadosh ata ladonai, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. We see three categories here identified, as we've pointed out, and as we're developing this reflection. We have the category of Israel, which is called Am Kodesh, the holy people to Hashem. We have the ger, the sojourner. Specifically, it says, Lager asher b'shareka, the ger who is at your gates. We're going to be spending, before too long, some time on what the meaning is of there of the gates. And then the nachri. The ger is somebody who has entered into Israel's public Torah order. The nochri is somebody who has remained outside of that order. As we have been learning, the word nochri maps onto the idea of foreignness, of el nochri, foreign god, and it is very closely associated with avodah zarah. These are the passages, all the passages in the Torah and the Humash that use nevela in reference to animals. The purple occurrences are the explicit references of nevela for a kosher species. The black references are the uses of nevela for unkosher species. You can see that the majority of the occurrences of nevela is used for unkosher species. We have only 4 explicit occurrences for a kosher species, possibly 5. And why do I say possibly 5? Because as we've seen in Deuteronomy 14:21, it is not clear, it is not explicit. whether the nevela there is referring to a kosher species or to an unkosher species. I should mention this. In Alpe Shemua, per tradition, in the Jewish tradition, we understand the nevela of Deuteronomy 14:21 to be specifically the nevela of a kosher species. That's our tradition. However, textually, if you're working just within the text of Deuteronomy, the closest use of nevela is in reference to the chazir, the pig. Okay, but it is Alpe Shemua per the hearing, per the tradition that we understand the nevela of Deuteronomy 14:21 as a reference to a kosher species that died without appropriate slaughter. Before we continue on the next slides, we need to emphasize this distinction. As we have pointed out, the regulations regarding clean and unclean that occur in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers are primarily focused on the presence of the tabernacle. The tabernacle is in the midst of the children of Israel, and there is concern about the children of Israel contaminating the tabernacle and the altar, which would jeopardize God's presence. We haven't gotten into the full breadth of this, but the idea of the tuma, of the uncleanness, is associated with death. And that's associated with contamination of the space where God inhabits. And so this is why the removal of the tuma, of the contamination associated with death, is such a big concern, to distance that from God's place of dwelling and habitation. So where Leviticus and Numbers, and Leviticus is concerned with tabernacle purity, it frames the dietary restrictions relative to the tabernacle and to the altar. Deuteronomy moves into a different register. With Deuteronomy, the people of Israel are moving into the land. The mikdash, the temple, is not going to be in their backyard or in a readily accessible position. And the concern with eating moves from tabernacle purity to the question of covenantal identity. It's worth noting, this is really quite fascinating. When you look at the traditional Christian theologies of temple and people, you'll notice that Christian theologies have attacked the idea of holy place, the idea of the temple, the idea of the boundaries that bound the temple, the idea of holy time like the Sabbath, the idea of holy food, the idea that God even cares about food, the idea that God is even concerned about things that happen in the material world. But you'll notice that Christian theology has often attacked the temple and taken it away, and taken away the altar. And then, and to add insult to injury, Christian theology is often focused on a replacement theology, replacing the people of God, Israel, with a new entity. And so you'll notice here that the biblical food boundaries map specifically onto these areas. The first being Kedusha, the Kedushath Mikdash, the holiness of the temple. The second being also Kedusha, holiness, the Kedushath Am, the holiness of the people of Israel. This is where, when you look at the Christian theologies, they tend to attack these specific areas. And this is where, for the beauty of the Torah pursuant world and all that they're trying to accomplish, when they take away these two pillars, the pillar of the continuity of the temple and the Avodath Hashem, the God's liturgy in the temple, which will be rebuilt speedily in our days. And when you take away the continuity of God's people Israel, you've also taken away the reason for the distinctions in food. They are specifically there for these two concerns. Okay. But I need to mention this here now, this distinction, because we're going to be seeing some of the Levitical and the tabernacle purity concerns being applied to nevela. As mentioned in Deuteronomy, the concern is not ritual purity, but distinctions in covenantal identity. So Leviticus 11 is often seen as the big menu chapter. I've pointed out here already that there is quite a few occurrences of the word nevela in Leviticus. You can see the first 9 occurrences specifically describe the carcasses of unkosher species, the swarming creatures, the chazir, the pig. I think the camel is also described here as nevela. But then in Leviticus 11, same chapter, verse 39 and 40, there are 3 occurrences of nevela, specifically in reference to a kosher or permissible species. Here we have those occurrences. It reads, "Waki yamuth min habahema asher hi lechem la'akla." If there should die any animal that you are permitted to eat, hanogea benivlatha yitame ad ha'arev, and someone touches its carcass, that person shall be unclean until the setting of the day. Obviously, they would need to make an immersion, a tevila. It goes on to read, ha'ochel minivlatham yaka base bagadav. Whoever eats of that carcass, like again, the carcass of a species, asher hi lechem la'acha, that is permissible for eating. If a person eats of that nevela, what happens? It says that they need to also make a tevila, an immersion. And it says, "Watamei ad ha'arev," and they shall be altar disqualified until the evening. And it says, "Wahanose es nivlatha," whoever picks up the nevela of a permissible beast, yeka base bagadav, shall immerse his clothes, watame ad ha'arev, and be unclean till the evening. Now, of course, we don't hold by ritual purity, as we've already learned, outside of the confines and the context of the temple. This is referring specifically to what happens in the context of proximity to the Mizbeach, the altar, at the time to the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Okay? But the question that we have to ask is, how is it that a dead cow is unclean? This is one of the reasons why the clean unclean rubric does not work in biblical kosher. But why would there be an unclean cow? Why would the cow be unclean? Okay, let's go to the next passage. This is Leviticus 17:15, and it says, "W'chol nefesh asher tochel nevela," whoever eats nevela. Now, let me also clarify this. It's speaking of the person that eats nevela. I'm hoping that you see the contradiction. The Torah is very clear, "Lo tochelu kol nevela," do not eat any nevela. So why is it speaking here of a person who eats nevela? Okay, it's spoken of here in Leviticus 11:40, and also in Leviticus 17:15. It says, "Well, kol nefesh asher tochel nevela," whoever eats nevela, uterefa, or a torn animal, be'ezrach uveger bechabes bagadav orachas b'mayim watame yad ha'arev watahir. Whoever eats an animal that's a nevela, or an animal that is torn, it dies from tearing, whether it be a native born or it be an immigrant, a ger, he shall likewise do a tevila, do an immersion. Again, this is a tabernacle context. He goes on to say, "Im lo yechabas basaro," if he does not immerse his flesh, lo rachatz b'naseh avono, he shall carry his sin. Again, I can't emphasize enough, this is referring specifically to a tabernacle context. So the question is, why would somebody be eating nevela when there's a command against eating nevela? This is speaking about the accidental ingestion or the touching of a nevela or a terefa. And this passage as well, if you read the context of Leviticus 17, it's referring to hunted meat. Hunted meat very easily becomes nevela and terefa, just because of the nature of the hunting experience. If an animal dies from a wound that is inflicted during the hunting and doesn't die from the appropriate method of slaughter, it becomes a nevela or a terefa. For example, an arrow into the lung causes internal bleeding, and it dies essentially through what could be called strangulation. In that case, the animal then is a nevela or a terefa. Okay, if it dies from a wound that tears a leg off, okay, that would be a terefa. Okay, it's going to die from that. But either way, the animal becomes nevela or terefa, and it's unclean. Now, again, it's speaking of a kosher species here as well. It's speaking most likely in this passage about a deer or a wild animal, a wild kosher species. The question we have to ask is this. We saw with the domestic species in Leviticus 11 that their nevela, their carcass, is unclean. We're seeing here as well with the hunted animal that their carcass can become unclean. It doesn't have to be. The question is this. When does an otherwise edible animal become a nevela? We have a cow, you have a deer, you have a sheep. How does it become a nevela? Is every dead cow a nevela? Well, we know that's not true because of the following question. The question can be asked, can a nevela be offered on the altar? Can a nevela be brought on the mizbeach? The answer is no. Why can a nevela not be brought onto the altar? The answer is very simple. It's unclean. Because the nevela is unclean, it can't be brought onto the altar. If it's brought on the altar, then we have a defiling altar disqualification, and it would not be accepted as an offering. Okay, so really important. So this tells us something very, very significant. This circumscribes an issue. We see that a clean species can be a nevela, and a clean species can be not nevela. If a kosher species can become unclean as a nevela, then how can that same species ever become qualified for the altar? If every dead cow is a nevela, if every dead sheep is a nevela, we could never have offerings on the mizbeach, on the altar. So let's define nevela here at the bottom. We're going to leave you hanging here with a cliffhanger. The first definition of nevela, the majority used in the Torah, is a non-food eligible animal, let's say a pig, that exists as a corpse or a carcass, regardless of the manner of death. Doesn't matter whether it be with a sword, whether it be with a projectile, whether it be with a slit to the throat. If it's a non-food eligible animal, it's always nevela when it's dead. The second use of nevela is a food eligible animal that becomes a carcass. Now hear this. It's a food eligible animal, cow, sheep, deer, that becomes a carcass outside of an authorized process. We have just discovered kosher slaughter. We'll be learning a lot more about this here as we continue in our learning, but we have identified by analogy very clearly deep within the grammar of the Torah that there is an authorized means of animals to enter the altar and also to enter the table of Israel. And that's through specifically through the method of what we're going to be calling altar slaughter. So what is the authorized entry of kosher species to the altar? How does a species become qualified to participate on the altar or the table? Okay, there are different regulations for the altar. There are unblemished and so on, but the same manner of death is prescribed for the cow, sheep, and goat, for the altar as for the table. And the ongoing question, and thank you for those who have answered this question. I've seen some really insightful, really thoughtful, just deep reflections on the nature of God with the following question. Why would God differentiate the table of Israel from that of the stranger at the gate? Why would God do that? Please comment with your answer below. Please share this video. Please subscribe. And let me remind you, coming this week, we are in the midst of the 9 days. This is the 9 days specifically of fasting as we prepare for Tish B'Av, the 9th of Av. It's the only other 25-hour fast in the Jewish calendar. The other one is Yom Kippur. We have Tish B'Av beginning Wednesday evening. We nationally mourn for the destruction of both the first and second temples. And it's on that evening, on the 9th of Av, we are going to be launching our NT project. This is a study course that you're not going to want to miss. We will be reading and learning the NT, beginning with Ephesians 2, with Torah disciplined eyes. And what you are going to be hearing here is what you'll be hearing more broadly in the next 5 to 10 years. You will be ahead of the curve. We still have seats available. There are limited seats. We ask and encourage you to invest in this area of growth. You will learn things and see things that you have not seen before, I assure you. And you can sign up at perfectingtheworld.com. That's the registration page. And the registration is still open. It will continue after the first session, which is this Thursday, but we only have 50 seats available in the live session. And when you register, you will get access to all of our learning content, from our Mishnah Walk learning to our Torah Tuesday learning, and to any other. We have some more projects coming as well too. We have a lot of beautiful projects. One of our fundamental goals right now is structure and accountability. The people who are behind the scenes here or in the front lines, you may see us, you may not see us, have all been in the world of the chaos of trying to establish what it means to be Torah faithful and not having accountable community. We are specifically trying to create within the observant Jewish world a growing space for Torah pursuant non-Jews to interface and learn in a healthy manner that respects the boundaries of Israel, the boundaries given at Sinai, and that even invites and allows participation within those boundaries. This is an ambitious project, but it's, with God's help, it's going to happen. This is the time for it. I encourage you to join us. I'll be back tomorrow night for 8 o'clock. We will be further unpacking the basics from the written Torah for how we understand the authorized method of food entering the table of Israel through appropriate kosher biblical slaughter. Have a fantastic evening, and we will be in touch here. Talk to you soon. Good night.
Join the perfectingtheworld.com community today.